There is a town in California where the beds are still made. There is a town in Pennsylvania where the ground has been on fire for over 60 years. There is a town in Alaska where a 14-story building stands empty in the snow, its machinery frozen mid-motion, as if the workers simply walked out one afternoon and never came back. And there is a town in Alabama that was once the capital of an entire state, a place where governors signed laws and fortunes were built on cotton, and today you can walk down its main street and find nothing but grass, brick foundations, and the slow, patient work of the forest reclaiming what people left behind. These are not legends. These are real places, still standing, still findable on a map, and each one holds a question that has never been fully answered. Why did everyone leave, and why, in some cases, did they leave so much behind? Over the next 20 minutes, we are going to walk through 4 of America's strangest abandoned settlements: a lawless gold town, a town swallowed by fire from below, a mountain company town abandoned almost overnight, and a lost capital city buried in southern soil. Each one tells a different story about ambition, disaster, and the fragile thread that holds a community together. And each one leaves behind mysteries that historians, park rangers, and curious travelers are still trying to piece together today. Let's start high in the Sierra Nevada, at an elevation just over 8,000 feet, in a place so remote and so harsh that even the men who built it wondered why anyone would want to live there. In the summer of 1859, a prospector named William S. Bodie was picking through the hills east of the Sierra Nevada when he found something that would change the fate of that mountainside forever: gold. It wasn't a fortune, not yet, just enough color in the rock to convince him and a handful of others that something bigger might be hiding beneath the surface. But Bodie never got to find out. That same winter, caught in a blizzard while walking back from a supply run, he froze to death within a few miles of the camp that would one day carry his name. He never saw a single building rise from the town he had unknowingly founded. Even the spelling of the town's name is disputed. Some say a careless sign painter simply couldn't spell Bodie correctly, others say the townspeople changed it on purpose so outsiders would pronounce it right. Either way, the man who discovered it was already gone by the time it existed. For nearly 2 decades, Bodie remained a minor mining camp, home to no more than a few dozen people scraping by on modest finds. Then, in 1876, everything changed. The Standard Company blasted into a massive, rich vein of gold ore, and almost overnight, a sleepy outpost transformed into one of the most notorious boomtowns in the American West. Word spread fast. Within a few years, thousands of fortune seekers poured into the mountains, and by 1880, Bodie's population had swelled to somewhere near 10,000 people. For a brief, wild moment, it was reportedly the 3rd largest city in California, packed into a remote high desert basin that offered no easy way in and no easy way out. What kind of town was Bodie? By every account, it was rough. 65 saloons lined a main street that stretched barely a mile long. Gambling halls, brothels, and opium dens operated in the open. Gunfights, robberies, and murders were common enough that they barely made news. One well-documented case, the killing of a man named Trelor by a miner named DeRoche in 1881, ended not in a courtroom but with a vigilante group known only as the 601, dragging DeRoche from his jail cell and hanging him near the site of his crime. There was no trial. There was no appeal. In Bodie, justice often moved as fast, and as violently, as the men who dispensed it. And yet, for all its lawlessness, Bodie was surprisingly forward-thinking. It had a telegraph office, a fire department, several competing daily newspapers, a railroad, and, remarkably for its time and location, it was among the earliest towns in California to run on electricity. It had its own Chinatown, home to a significant population of Chinese immigrants who worked the mines and ran businesses, adding another layer to a town that was as diverse as it was dangerous. By the time all was said and done, the mines around Bodie had produced somewhere between $30 and $38 million in gold and silver, a staggering sum for the era. But boomtowns, almost by definition, do not last. As the richest veins played out, miners drifted away in search of the next big strike. A kitchen fire in 1892 tore through the western half of town, and though it was rebuilt, the damage to both the buildings and the town's momentum was done. The real death blow came 4 decades later, in the early summer of 1932, when a fire, reportedly started by a young boy playing with matches, consumed most of what remained of Bodie's downtown. Large-scale mining had already ceased by 1915. Small operations limped along for a few more decades, but by 1942, wartime restrictions on non-essential mining sealed the town's fate for good. The last residents packed up and left. Bodie was, officially, a ghost town. Here is where the story becomes strange. Unlike so many other abandoned settlements that were stripped for scrap or slowly collapsed into the dirt, Bodie was frozen in time. When the state of California took over the site in 1962 and turned it into a state historic park, officials made a deliberate choice. Rather than restoring the buildings to their former glory, they would maintain them in what's called a state of arrested decay, stopping the clock exactly where it stood, without erasing the decades of weathering and neglect. Today, more than 100 structures remain standing. Walk through the schoolhouse and you'll find children's desks still arranged in rows, some still holding open textbooks. Peer into the old general store and see shelves lined with cans and bottles, exactly as they were left. It's a town where roughly 200 buildings survive out of what was once nearly 2,000, a mere 10%, and yet that 10% is so intact that visitors often describe the eerie sensation that the residents only stepped out for a moment, and might return any second. That eerie feeling has fed decades of ghost stories. Visitors and park staff alike have described unexplained footsteps in empty buildings, sudden cold spots, and the sense of being watched. One legend, known as the Angel of Bodie, tells of the spirit of a young child said to linger in the town cemetery. But it's a different kind of legend that has followed Bodie the longest, and it's the one park rangers say they hear about most often, the curse of Bodie. According to the story, any visitor who takes even the smallest object from the town, a rusted nail, a shard of broken glass, a single pebble, will be haunted by misfortune until the item is returned. Whether or not you believe in curses, something strange keeps happening. Park staff have reported receiving packages in the mail for years, containing stolen artifacts along with apologetic letters from visitors convinced their bad luck began the moment they pocketed a piece of Bodie's history. Bodie tells one kind of American ghost town story: riches, violence, and abandonment. But not every town died because the gold ran out. Some towns died because the ground itself turned against the people living on it. And for our next stop, we're heading to the hills of eastern Pennsylvania, to a town that isn't just abandoned, it's still burning. Centralia, Pennsylvania, was founded in 1866 by a mining engineer named Alexander Ray, built on the same anthracite coal that powered much of industrial America. By the late 1800s, the town was thriving, home to more than 2,000 residents, 14 active coal mines, churches, schools, and shops lining its streets. Even its early history had a dark, violent undercurrent. During the 1860s, Centralia became entangled with the Molly Maguires, a secret society with roots in Ireland that was linked to a string of killings in the region, including, some historians believe, the murder of the town's own founder. Beneath the surface, quite literally, Centralia was a town built on danger from the very beginning. For nearly a century, though, Centralia simply lived the ordinary life of an American coal town, booming, then slowly declining as the industry shifted, but never disappearing. By the 1960s, it was smaller than its heyday but still home to more than 1,000 people. Nobody could have guessed that the event which would end the town forever wasn't a mine collapse, or an explosion, or a flood. It was garbage. In 1962, the Centralia Borough Council decided to clean up an old strip mine pit that had become an unofficial dump, clearing it out before Memorial Day. Workers set fire to the trash to burn it down, a fairly ordinary practice at the time. But this particular pit had an opening. Some accounts describe a gap roughly 15 feet wide near its base, that hadn't been properly sealed with fire-resistant material. That gap led straight down into the maze of abandoned coal tunnels running beneath the town. The fire found its way into the coal seam itself. And coal, once it catches, does not put itself out. What followed was years of increasingly desperate and expensive attempts to extinguish the blaze. Digging trenches. Flooding tunnels. Drilling boreholes. Nothing worked. The fire simply kept spreading, following the seams of coal wherever they led, deeper and wider beneath the streets and homes of Centralia. For years, many residents didn't fully grasp what was happening beneath their feet: smoke here, a warm patch of ground there, nothing that seemed to threaten daily life. That illusion shattered in 1981, when a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking through his grandmother's backyard and the earth abruptly opened beneath him. He fell into a sinkhole roughly 4 feet wide and, by some accounts, over 100 feet deep, filled with hot steam and lethal gas. He managed to grab hold of a tree root and was pulled to safety by his cousin, but the incident made national headlines and turned Centralia from a local curiosity into a symbol of a town in crisis. The federal government eventually stepped in. In 1983, Congress approved more than $40 million to relocate residents and buy out their homes. Most people took the deal and left. But a small number refused. They had grown up there, buried family there, and they were not willing to abandon their houses to a fire they couldn't see. In 1992, the state of Pennsylvania went further, using eminent domain to condemn every remaining property in Centralia and revoking the town's zip code entirely, erasing it, administratively, from the map. A handful of holdouts fought a legal battle simply for the right to live out their lives in their own homes. Eventually, a court order allowed a handful of residents to remain until their deaths, with the stipulation that their properties could not be sold or passed down. Slowly, one by one, even that final population dwindled toward zero. Today, Centralia is almost impossible to describe as a town at all. Streets remain, cracked and overgrown, leading to driveways that end in empty lots where houses once stood. Steam and smoke still occasionally rise from vents and fissures in the ground, especially after rain, when the earth seems to breathe. Officials estimate the fire could keep burning for another century or more. It has already outlived the town it destroyed by more than 60 years, and it will likely outlive most of the people reading about it today. Centralia's story became so well known that it inspired the setting for the horror film franchise Silent Hill, but the real town needs no fictional embellishment. It is one of the only places in America where you can stand on a public road and feel, quite literally, the heat of a fire that has been burning, unseen, since before most of us were born. If Centralia shows us a town destroyed by something hidden beneath the ground, our next location shows us something almost the opposite, a town abandoned so suddenly, and so completely, that entire buildings full of machinery, records, and equipment were simply left behind, as though the people who worked there expected to come back the next season and never did. Deep in the Alaskan wilderness, in the shadow of Wrangell St. Elias, sits the remains of Kennecott. In the summer of 1900, 2 prospectors, Clarence Warner and a man known only as Tarantula Jack Smith, were exploring near the Kennecott Glacier when they came across something almost unbelievable, a cliff face streaked bright green, so vivid that at first they assumed it was some kind of unusual meadow grass. It wasn't grass. It was copper, exposed in concentrations so pure that later assays would reveal or containing up to 70% chalcocite, among the richest copper deposits ever discovered in North America. The problem was location. This deposit sat in one of the most remote, inaccessible corners of the continent, cut off by glaciers, mountains, and hundreds of miles of untouched wilderness. Ordinarily, that kind of isolation would kill a mining venture before it started. But the ore was so extraordinarily rich that a group of powerful financiers, including, according to multiple historical accounts, J.P. Morgan himself, decided it was worth an almost unthinkable investment, an entire railroad, built specifically to haul copper out of the mountains to the port town of Cordova. The company town of Kennecott, its name, somewhat ironically, a misspelling of the Kennecott Copper Corporation, itself named after a nearby glacier and river, was officially founded in 1911. Kennecott was a strict company town in every sense. Workers lived in company housing, ate in company kitchens, and followed company rules, including bans on gambling and alcohol. Miners were not permitted to bring their families to live in the camp itself, so nearby McCarthy grew as a rowdier, unofficial counterpart where workers could unwind on their time off. At its peak, roughly 500 people called Kennecott home, working across 5 different mines named Bonanza, Jumbo, Mother Lode, Erie, and Glacier, feeding or into a towering, 14-story wooden mill building that still dominates the site today. For nearly 3 decades, Kennecott hummed with activity, producing an estimated $200 million worth of high-grade copper, helping fuel America's electrical revolution and its industrial expansion in the years before and during the First World War. But rich as the deposit was, it was not infinite. By the mid-1930s, the highest grade ore had been exhausted, and continuing to mine what remained was no longer profitable given the immense cost of operating in such a remote location. In 1938, the company made its decision: shut it all down. And this is where Kennecott becomes genuinely strange. When the workers left, they didn't take everything with them. Heavy machinery, personal belongings, office equipment, even furniture, much of it was simply left behind, as though the closure happened faster than anyone could properly plan for. Some accounts suggest the very last train pulled out of Kennecott so abruptly that residents boarded with only what they could carry, leaving homes, tools, and records still sitting inside the buildings. For years afterward, the town sat essentially untouched, visited only by the occasional hunter, trapper, or curious traveler willing to make the difficult journey in. There was a brief attempt to revive mining operations in the late 1960s, but it went nowhere. In the 1970s, the land changed hands multiple times, eventually passing to private buyers who subdivided portions of it for sale. It wasn't until 1998 that the National Park Service, working with conservation groups, was able to acquire the core historic buildings and formally protect them. Today, Kennecott sits inside Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, the largest national park in the United States, and it has been designated a National Historic Landmark. Visitors who make the long, difficult drive down a narrow, 60-mile gravel road can walk the wooden boardwalks between buildings that look almost exactly as they did the day the last workers walked out: the mill, the power plant, the hospital, the bunkhouses, all standing in remarkable, undisturbed condition against a backdrop of glaciers and jagged peaks. It remains one of the best preserved examples of an early 20th century American mining operation anywhere in the world, a snapshot of ambition and sudden abandonment, thousands of miles from anywhere. Our final stop takes us away from mining altogether, into the deep south, to a town that didn't fall because of fire, gold, or copper, but because of politics, floods, and the upheaval of a nation tearing itself apart. Long before European settlers arrived, the land at the confluence of the Cahawba and Alabama rivers was already significant. Archaeological evidence shows that a fortified Mississippian-era village stood on the site as early as the 11th century, complete with a defensive wall, a moat, and a large ceremonial mound, a community that thrived there for centuries before it vanished into history for reasons that remain only partially understood. In 1819, when Alabama officially became a state, the land was granted by the federal government, and lawmakers made a bold choice: they would build Alabama's very first state capital from scratch at this river junction, naming it Cahawba. It was, at the time, largely undeveloped wilderness, so lawmakers were forced to conduct state business out of temporary quarters in Huntsville while Cahawba was built up around them. By 1820, the town was functioning as the seat of Alabama's government, but almost immediately, critics pointed to its low elevation and its vulnerability to flooding as reasons the location was a mistake. That criticism proved politically effective. In 1826, the legislature voted to move the capital to Tuscaloosa, and within weeks, much of Cahawba's population packed up and left along with it. But Cahawba refused to disappear entirely. Freed from its role as capital, the town reinvented itself as a commercial hub, becoming a major shipping point for cotton grown on the plantations of Alabama's fertile Black Belt region. Through the 1840s and 1850s, Cahawba experienced a genuine revival, growing into a wealthy antebellum river town with grand homes and a bustling economy built, as so much of the antebellum South was, on the labor of enslaved people. The Civil War changed everything again. Cahawba lost its railroad terminus during the conflict, crippling its role as a shipping center. During the war, the town's old warehouse was converted into a Confederate prison, holding captured Union soldiers in brutal conditions. And then, in the chaos and transformation of Reconstruction, something remarkable happened. As white residents left the declining town in search of better prospects elsewhere, formerly enslaved people moved in and built a new community around the abandoned government buildings. For a period, freedmen registered to vote, held political rallies inside the old courthouse, and even sent representatives to help rewrite Alabama's state constitution. Local newspapers of the era, hostile to this shift, reportedly derided Cahawba as a stronghold of Reconstruction-era black political power. It's a chapter of Cahawba's history that's often overshadowed by its earlier role as a capital, but it may be one of its most historically significant. That community, too, eventually dispersed, as the county seat officially moved to nearby Selma in 1866, stripping Cahawba of its remaining administrative importance. From there, the decline was steady and, in the end, total. Buildings burned. Others were dismantled, their bricks and timber hauled away and reused to construct homes and storefronts in Selma. By 1900, Cahawba's streets stood largely silent, its population scattered, its grand homes reduced to skeletal ruins draped in Spanish moss. Remarkably, the town wasn't even officially unincorporated until 1989, meaning that on paper, Cahawba technically remained a town for more than a century after nearly everyone who lived there was gone. Today, the site is preserved as Old Cahawba Archaeological Park, managed by the Alabama Historical Commission. Visitors can walk beneath ancient oaks, past brick foundations, ornamental well heads, and the towering, freestanding columns of what was once the Grand Crocheron Mansion, now standing alone, holding up nothing but open sky. Archaeologists continue to work the site, still uncovering new layers of a story that stretches back nearly 1,000 years, from a fortified Native American village, to a short-lived state capital, to a wealthy river port, to a Reconstruction-era center of black political life, to the quiet, grass-covered ruin it is today. Visitors and staff alike have also long reported an unusually heavy, watchful atmosphere on the grounds, especially near the old cemetery, feelings that some attribute to the sheer weight of everything the land has witnessed. 4 towns. For completely different reasons for dying. A gold camp consumed by its own violent boom-and-bust cycle. A coal town undone by a fire nobody could see, still burning to this day beneath ground that no longer holds a single home. A remote copper camp abandoned so quickly that machinery still sits waiting for workers who never returned. And a river capital that rose, fell, rose again, and finally dissolved into the Alabama soil, carrying with it one of the most overlooked chapters of Reconstruction history in the entire South. What strikes you, standing in any of these places, isn't just the decay. It's the specificity of it, the exact desk still in the Bodie schoolroom, the exact gap in Centralia's landfill wall, the exact railcar that left Kennecott for the last time, the exact column still standing at Cahawba with nothing left to hold up. These aren't abstract ruins. They are the physical residue of thousands of individual decisions, to stay, to leave, to fight, to give up, made by real people whose names, in most cases, we will never know. Every one of these towns was, at some point, someone's entire world. A place where children went to school, where neighbors argued over fences, where people fell in love and buried their dead. And then, for reasons ranging from a snowstorm to a landfill fire to a played-out copper vein to a river that flooded one too many times, that entire world simply stopped. America doesn't like to dwell on its failures. The story we tell ourselves is usually one of growth, bigger cities, bigger industries, more people, more progress. But scattered across this country are hundreds of places like these 4, monuments to the other side of that story, the towns that didn't make it, the booms that went bust, the communities erased by fire, by economics, by nature, or by simple bad luck. They sit quietly in the mountains, in the coal fields, in the glacier valleys, and in the river bottoms, waiting for anyone curious enough to come looking. If you could only save one of these 4 towns from disappearing completely, Bodie, Centralia, Kennecott, or Cahawba, which one would you choose, and why? Tell us in the comments.